Let me know, Taz, when we're good to go. We go? All right. Good evening. It's good to see you after, this is the last week, so 6 weeks. It's the last one. The Song of Songs. It's going to be an interesting book, isn't it? And tonight is a little bit, for me, special. I couldn't remember if Anne and I have ever done a presentation of some sort together. I can't remember one. It would go really bad. So we decided to do one on sex as our warm-up. I actually think, having kind of prepared for the Song of Songs, I think it's probably appropriate that a husband and wife do it. If you're going to have two people doing it, then it's probably good having a husband and wife do it. But the other thing that's probably a little unique is my wife's professional life actually has quite an intersection with what we're going to talk about. So that's actually a little unique, I think. I can't think of any other pastor that has a what's your title now? Pelvic health physio. So we're taking opportunity to utilise that experience. Well, let's pray, and then we'll get into the Song of Songs. Father, thank you for tonight. Thank you for these people who have been faithful in coming along and hearing about the various wisdom books. And as we close off tonight, we pray that tonight will be valuable for everybody. We find a book like this quite interesting, and especially so in a time when our ideas around romantic relationships, sexual desire, our physical, sexual lives are all a bit skewed. And so we'd ask for you to be present as we look at your word and follow this love story. Help Anne in particular. I think she's feeling pretty nervous about it all. So be present with her, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. If you have your Bibles, why don't you pull open the Song of Songs, and what we're going to do is try and make sure. I'm having a little trouble with this clicker. It's not clicking. So I'm gonna go. Just go here. All right. So what we're going to do is, we thought that one of the ways that it would be cool to experience the Song of Songs, actually read a few little sections. And the approach that I'm going to take is I'm going to take us through the storyline and the book as it presents itself. And then I'm going to give a section where I unpack a few little things that I've observed on the way through. We're going to have a break, and then Anne's going to come and work her magic. All right, so that's kind of the shape of tonight. I'm actually going to need you, Anne, so you can't sit over there. You have to come and join us. And if you've not read the Song of Songs, there are 8 chapters. It's a very short book. It's of a genre that I don't like in movies. I'm not a love romance movie guy. I have watched a few because I'm married, and I have watched it with Anne. But there are 8 chapters of love poetry, and this book kicks off by telling us this is Solomon's Song of Songs. So if any of you know Tenacious D, they wrote a tribute song to the greatest song of all time. This is the song that they forgot. Most of you don't seem to know Jack Black. So this is the song of all songs. This is the greatest song of all time. It's the song of love, which is amazing to say, given that the Bible has quite a few songs in it. And so its claim is that this is the best song ever. The song is actually a collection of poems, and it explores love, explores sexual desire between a woman and a man. The main voice in the song is a woman's voice. She's the one who speaks the most. There is the lover, and then there are some friends as well who chime in every now and then. While the title says that it's Solomon's Song of Songs, it's kind of a little hard to get your head around that Solomon would write this. Because if you read the book, you'll find out that this is a woman and a man with just one eye for each other, no others. They're exclusive love, and there is not another person on the planet for them. Solomon had 700 wives, so it's hard to believe that he would have an inkling of what that might be like, right? So he had a lot of wives. He's a strange candidate to be the lover. And not only that, again, we're going to highlight a few points where Solomon is mentioned by name and he's not mentioned in a good way. So it's unlikely Solomon would have written a book about himself in a way that puts himself down and also demonstrates a lifestyle that he never led. It doesn't seem likely, does it? So this book is probably written in more of the vein of Ecclesiastes, which also uses Solomon as a bit of an example. Like Solomon's a guy who has everything anyone's heart's desire could want. And then Ecclesiastes reflects on how empty that is. Well, here we have Solomon, 700 wives, a man that spread himself way too thin. Let's reflect on what the opposite would be. The focus of one man and one woman loving each other. So the basic storyline is a woman and a man who are probably engaged, and they are deeply in love. They have a powerful desire to be together. And as the song weaves backwards and forwards, there's a woman who chases a man, and then there's a man who chases a woman, and the woman chases the man. So there's a lot of chasing. There's desire, they seek, they find, they enjoy each other, and for some strange reason they get separated again. And we're going to see that as we go. It's a bit of a dance, this book. And and there are parts of the book, because there's a dance, we're not really sure at points who's talking. Is it the woman talking? Is the man talking? Fortunately for us, translators have made the choices. So if you've got an NIV Bible, have at the top she. That's the she voice talking. The woman's talking, or a he. He's talking, or friends, or they. Some Bibles have beloved and lover, right? So they kind of identify that. What you'll notice if you read different translations is at certain points they put that part of the song to a different audience member. So for us, because our Hebrew is rubbish, right? So I'm just going to go with whatever choices those translators made. They're way more informed than me. And we're going to go with the NIV choices. Not necessarily because it's better. The Message is actually quite a fascinating book way of reading this. And they've made a few different choices. But we're just going to go with the NIV. I don't think it really changes the experience of the song. What we're going to do tonight is Anne is going to be the woman. Let's welcome Anne. I thought really hard about this, so I'm going to be the man. Let's welcome the man. All right? Now, you will be the friends. So let's welcome the friends. Excellent. And what we're going to do is we're going to read segments of the book. And at certain points, you will have a little orange bit on the screen here that says friends. That means you talk, all right? And that'll give us a bit of a gist of the way that the song is experienced. I can't remember, have I prayed? Yes, I've prayed. Let's get into... I'd hate to get into this book without any prayer. All right, now I'm not sure if you can see this. If you have your Bibles, you can follow along as well if you can't see the screen. All right, so why don't we kick into chapter 1?
And just before we do, the language is obviously a little bit different to the way we would speak, so just excuse if Jason and I smile or maybe even laugh as we're reading these words. Apologies in advance.
And I think you're taking it a little too seriously. I think we're meant to... Look, I'm sure some lovers somewhere talk like this, but it's not been us, let's just say that. It may surprise you. Solomon's Song of Songs.
Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. Pleasing is the fragrance of your perfumes. Your name is like perfume poured out. No wonder the young women love you. Take me away with you. Let us hurry. Let the king bring me into his chambers. We rejoice and delight in you. We will praise your love more than wine. How right they are to adore you. Dark am I, yet lovely, daughters of Jerusalem. Dark like the tents of Kedar, like the tent curtains of Solomon. Do not stare at me because I am darkened by the sun. My mother's sons were angry with me and made me take care of the vineyards. My own vineyard I had to neglect. Tell me, you whom I love, where you graze your flock and where you rest your sheep at midday. Why should I be like a veiled woman beside the flocks of your friends?
It's she again. Oh, is it he?
It's he.
Oh, it's he. So it says she there, but I think she's right. I've lost track. I liken you, my darling, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariots horses. Your cheeks are beautiful with earrings, your neck with strings of jewels. We will make you earrings of gold studded with silver.
While the king was at his table, my perfume spread its fragrance. My beloved is to me a sachet of myrrh resting between my breasts. My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms from the vineyard of En-Gedi.
How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful. Your eyes are doves.
How handsome you are, my beloved. Oh, how charming. And our bed is verdant.
We actually had to look up the word verdant. It means green. The beams of our house are cedars and our rafters are firs.
I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys.
Like a lily among thorns is my darling among the young women. So this woman says her lover is amazing. He's got kisses that are better than the best wine. And the friends really enjoy seeing her love for this man. But if you notice, the woman feels actually a bit insecure. She feels insecure about the competition. There are other young women that also like him. She feels insecure about her appearance. She's got all dark, which back then I'm guessing was bad, because now actually people tan. But back then she got all dark because she was out in the fields labouring away, so she just looked like a commoner. And she was therefore also questioning her desirability. He responds, and so she says things like this: do not stare at me because I'm darkened by the sun. My mother's sons were angry with me and made me take care of the vineyards, and my own vineyard I had to neglect. My own body I neglected. And so from that insecurity, she starts to seek him and look out for him because she wants his comfort and his assurance that she's loved by him. And so she asks the question, where is he? And he finds her. And he responds with this equal level of desire. You are beautiful. And he affirms her beauty, and he affirms to her that he has only eyes for her. That every other woman is like thorns compared to her lily. So that begins the dance. In chapter 2, there's this refrain that's repeated a couple of times through the song. It says, daughters of Jerusalem. Is that what I've put up there? Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and by the does of the field, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. And so the warning to these friends is, be careful about loving someone and about loving them too quickly, because it can have a powerful and overwhelming impact on you. She says things like this. She says, I am faint with love. And as you read the book, you discover that this love that she's experiencing for this man dominates her thoughts, it heightens her insecurities, it keeps her awake, it puts her in danger. In chapter 3, the woman is at home and she's lying awake thinking about her man. So she gets up out of bed and she goes off into the city to try and find him. But somehow she gets lost and then she's in trouble. And then finally he finds him and she feels safe. So she's trying to say to her friends, be careful who you love and how quickly you love. Because when you fall in love, it has this impact on your life that can be overwhelming. Don't rush into it. But having given her warning to all of her friends, she knows for sure she has no regrets in loving this man. She's certain he's the one. She has this beautiful line, my beloved is mine and I am his. And she contrasts her lover to King Solomon. If you just have a look at what she says about King Solomon. She says, look, it's Solomon's carriage. He's escorted by 60 warriors, the noblest of Israel, all of them wearing the sword, all experienced in battle, each with his sword at his side, prepared for the terrors of the night. King Solomon made for himself the carriage. He made it of wood from Lebanon. Its posts he made of silver, its base of gold. She expresses how powerful and how rich Solomon is. But then she goes on to say, well, for all of that wealth that Solomon has, he's nothing compared to my king, my man, my lover, and he's nothing compared to the love that we have, even though he's very rich and powerful. So then in chapter 4, he says a few things. How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful. Your eyes behind your veil are doves. Your hair is like a flock of goats descending from the hills of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep just shorn, coming up from the washing. Each of them its twin, not one of them is alone. Yes, you can see what he's talking about. Your lips are like a scarlet ribbon. Your mouth is lovely. Your temples behind your veil are like halves of a pomegranate. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built with courses of stone. On it hang 1,000 shields, all of them shields of warriors. Your breasts are like two fawns, like twin fawns of a gazelle that browse among the lilies. Until the day breaks and the shadows flee, I'll go to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of incense. You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There is no flaw in you. I'm not keeping up here, am I? You've stolen my heart, my sister, my bride. You've stolen my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. How delightful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much more pleasing is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your perfume more than any spice. Your lips drop sweetness as honeycomb, my bride. Milk and honey are under your tongue. The fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. Quick response. Like the fragrance of Lebanon. No, I'm skipping all that. It just keeps going on.
Awake, north wind, and come, south wind. Blow on my garden, that its fragrance may spread everywhere. Got to turn the page. Let my beloved come into his garden and taste its choice fruits.
I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I've gathered my myrrh with my spice. I've eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I've drunk my wine and my milk. So someone has had a crack at drawing the picture that he's just described. Literally. It's clearly not meant literally. But some of it is, you can get a grasp. I know we're not kind of agricultural folk, but you can get a grasp that if each tooth has its twin, she's not got any gaps. Yeah, the shorn sheep, they're nice and white. And in Australia we have fluoride and the wonders of dentistry, right? But it's not insignificant to have good teeth globally. So there are some descriptions that really offer in the imagery kind of sensual ideas, and it's actually a little bit more powerful because of the illusions it makes. So your teeth are like a flock of sheep just shorn. Your lips are like a scarlet ribbon. Your breasts are like two fawns. Awake north wind, come south wind, blow on my garden. By chapter 5, so the woman's done some chasing up to this point. Chapter 5, now the man chases the woman. And he comes seeking her. But she's in bed. And she says to herself, I've gotten ready for bed. I've washed my hair. I've taken all my makeup off. Do I really have to get up as he's knocking at the door? And finally she decides that he's worth the trouble. But now she gets to the door and he's gone. He's impatient, this man. He couldn't wait for her. And so now she is looking for him. And she says, daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, what will you tell me? Tell him I am faint with love. And the friends ask her, what is so good about this man? And she says,
my beloved is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. His head is purest gold. His hair is wavy and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves by the water streams, washed in milk, mounted like jewels. His cheeks are like beds of spice-yielding perfume. His lips are like lilies dripping with myrrh. His arms are rods of gold set with topaz.
I hear you, sister.
His body is like polished ivory, decorated with lapis lazuli. His legs are pillars of marble set on bases of pure gold. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as its cedars. His mouth is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovely. This is my beloved. This is my friend, daughters of Jerusalem.
Well, the friends say, well, where is he then? You like him so much, he's not here. And she says, he's off in his garden, gathering flowers, probably for me. And then he has thoughts as he's gathering his flowers about her. She's on his mind as he recalls her body and her beauty in detail. And he sums up by saying, 60 queens there may be, and 80 concubines, and virgins beyond number. But my dove, my perfect one, is unique, the only daughter of her mother, the favourite of the one who bore her. The young women saw her and called her blessed, and the queens and concubines praised her. The friends see him coming on the horizon with his flowers. But once again, the woman's left. She's nowhere to be seen. And now he's chasing her. And wonder of wonders, eventually they find each other. And the friends say,
under the apple tree I roused you. There your mother conceived you. There she who was in labour gave you birth. Place me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death. It's jealousy, unyielding as the grave. It burns like blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Many waters cannot quench love. Rivers cannot sweep it away. If one were to give all the wealth of one's house for love, it would be utterly scorned. I am a wall, and my breasts are like towers. Thus I have become in his eyes like one bringing contentment. Solomon had a vineyard in Baal-Hamon. He let out his vineyard to tenants. Each was to bring for its fruit 1,000 shekels of silver. But my own vineyard is mine to give. The 1,000 shekels are for you, Solomon, and 200 are for those who tend its fruit.
You who dwell in the gardens, with friends in attendance, let me hear your voice.
Come away, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or like a young stag on the spice-laden mountains.
Thus ends the song. Thank you, my beloved. There you go. It's not a long song, is it? So there's some key verses in here that tell us why it's important to be careful about rushing into love. It also tells us the power of love. That when you find the right one to love, it's amazing. And the verses are those ones that we just saw. Place me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death. Its jealousy unyielding as the grave. It burns like blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Many waters cannot quench love. Rivers cannot sweep it away. If one to give all the wealth of one's house for love, it would be utterly scorned. Interestingly, she reflects on Solomon as an example of how wealth has no ability to purchase love. She says of Solomon that he's got this vineyard. No, I didn't put that one there. Solomon had a vineyard in Baal-Hamon, and he let it out to tenants, and each was to bring its fruit 1,000 shekels of silver. So he's got his opulence. He's got all these things that are about wealth. But my vineyard, he cannot buy. I don't care how much money he's got. My vineyard is mine to give. The 1,000 shekels, you can keep it, Solomon. The 200, you can pay it off to those who tend your fruit, because I belong to my man alone. So she explains how love cannot be bought, true love cannot be bought, and concludes in these kinds of words in chapter 7, verse 10. I belong to my beloved, and his desire is for me. It feels like The Princess Bride a little, doesn't it, if you've ever seen that movie? A little sickly, but also a little sweet. So it's an interesting song. And the first question you've got to ask is, what is a song like this doing in the Bible? Lots of Jewish and Christian theologians have wondered the same, because it felt, frankly, too carnal, too sexual. So historically, the book was taken as an allegory of love between either Israel and God or Christ and the church. Modern times, we've become less queasy about sex. So modern commentaries tend to read it as it presents itself as love poetry between a man and a woman. And my own sense, as I've thought about this, is the book presents as a romantic love song. And so it's best understood as a love song. Given that, though, what is it doing in the Bible? Well, I think it does affirm romance and sexual desire and the love between a man and a woman. It's been created by God and it's good. So the fact that we've got a book dedicated quite explicitly to these themes is important, because sex is not a result of the fall, it's a result of creation. There is also, throughout the book, this repeated imagery of the garden. And the garden is this kind of evocative place of senses, but maybe also connects us back to the Garden of Eden when a man and a woman were literally made for each other. And it can, if you think about it from that point of view, contrast between the fallen experience of the relationship between a man and a woman. The first thing that happened in the fall was there was a shame, wasn't there? The people who were made for each other couldn't be naked with each other. They had to cover it up. And so there was a shame in the man and the woman's nakedness. And then in chapter 3, there's actually a power struggle that the woman is told in 3:16, your desire will be for your husband and he'll rule over you. So there's now an implied tension and struggle between the man and the woman. And so in contrast to what the fall says, that men and women can have shame between each other because of physical nakedness and things like that, which seems odd, but it's part of the fall. And also that there'll be tensions between men and women. Well, this one puts a picture of love untainted by selfishness and sin, and certainly untainted by being ashamed. There's no shame in this book about physical desire, and the explicit detail is painted out. So I think that alone warrants the book's place in Scripture because of what it affirms. And it's been unhelpful for church leaders and preachers to avoid that implication, because that avoidance actually leaves us with the impression that sex is bad and being naked is bad, and makes people ashamed, because the preachers and the leaders, frankly, are ashamed. The pastoral observation I've made since I've been working with adults in marital relations is that it definitely works out. That people have a lot of shame in their relationships with each other, and a lot of difficulty, and I don't think the church leaders and preachers necessarily have helped us. Now, if this song is referring to the relationship between Christ and the church, then actually I think it does it best by affirming that the song is what it presents itself to be, which is a song about deep desire between a man and a woman. If you were saying, for instance, that someone was as strong as an ox and you didn't know what an ox was, that wouldn't be a very helpful analogy, would it? And if the ox that you did know was weak and insipid, that wouldn't be a helpful analogy either. So the analogy is only strong when the picture you're getting is strong. So the Song of Songs gives us a very strong picture of unashamed desire between a man and a woman. And if you want to read that as an expression of the love between Christ and the church, then it's far better to just embrace the strength of that imagery for what it is than dodge it. Now, I grew up with people who definitely read the Song of Songs as a way of understanding their relationship with God. They found it in the book lots of helpful language. I don't. For me, it fails to function in that way. It definitely functions in a way that affirms my relationship with my wife and the liberty and freedom that I can enjoy as a husband, for sure. But for me, it doesn't help me in my worship and my language in my relationship with God. For you, it might. For me, it doesn't. A couple of other things I note on the way through. The woman has a lot of agency. We often paint the Old Testament and the New Testament as very patriarchal, where women were possessions and men were dominant and women were submissive. As I've read the Bible, firstly, I am a bit shocked at how unsubmissive and how fierce so many Bible women are. They're very, and maybe it's just a Hebrew thing, but they are fierce women. Like I would have been scared, petrified to be married to Leah and Rachel. They're just scary individuals. I don't know how come Jacob fell in love with them, but I would run away. They're just too fierce for me. But when we come to the Song of Songs, even more so. The Song of Songs, the main voice is the woman's voice. So I think it challenges our notions of this patriarchal society that women didn't have a voice and didn't have agency. Remember, she said this, "My vineyard is mine to give. My body is mine to give." And whether that was the actual reality in on the ground Israel culture, I don't know. But this song is painting a vision of women with agency in their relationships in a patriarchal society and time. It was probably, my guess, written by a man. So in other words, a man thought, according to what God has told me, that is a good vision. So I think that that's worth paying attention to. That in this relationship, this ideal relationship between a man and a woman, there's a mutuality of pursuing each other, of desiring each other, and of loving each other. I'd suggest we should pay attention to the woman's warning about romantic love and that it's powerful, that it needs to be treated with respect. So don't go into it too quickly and make yourself ready, because if you fall in love, it can drive you into places that you may not be able to. Remember, she said, "I'm faint with love." Now that sounds so sickly for those of us who've been married a while. It's craziness. But I still haven't stopped working with people who fall in love, right? And what I've noticed is it's tough for them within 6 months of being in love to make tough decisions, like, for instance, we're not getting along very well, we should break up. And so what happens is they keep going because it's too hard to break up, because I love this person too much, and that's true, but they're not really made right for each other. There are lots of clunky things. And by the time they sit with me and I'm about to do their wedding, it's a little late for me to say to them, you know what? In fact, I have said this to a few couples. This can work. You're just going to have to work really, really hard. And most people don't. Right? No one wants to listen to me say that just before they're getting married. That's what love is like. So be careful who you love, be careful how quickly you fall in love, treat it with respect. Last thing is, I wonder if these lovers are married. I'm not sure. If they are, then this song affirms the freedom that a husband and a wife can have with each other. If they're not, I'm having to do some work now, aren't I? If they're engaged, and I think that's actually more likely, then firstly, I'm hoping their wedding day is not far off. Right? I'm hoping it's next week. Tomorrow. The song affirms the sexual ethics of the scriptures. It does. Remember that little bit that the brothers say, "We have a little sister, and her breasts are not yet grown. What shall we do for our sister on the day she's spoken for? If she's a wall, we'll build towers of silver on her. If she's a door, we'll enclose her with panels to see that." What they're saying is, how can we protect our sister so that when she gets married, she's a virgin? That's all the elusive language towards protecting her from being sexually active before she's married. The woman there says, I am a wall, and my breasts are like towers. In other words, I have kept my purity. And why? Because I have become, in his eyes, the man that she loves. She wants to bring him contentment and him alone. So the book affirms the sexual ethics of the Bible, that sex is for marriage and that she belongs to one man alone. So if this song is for an engaged couple, it says a lot about the liberty of desire that an engaged couple can have in terms of thinking about each other while still respecting the boundaries that God sets. Now, in our time, I think we'd be pretty nervous to take this approach, right? And because you go, I was engaged once to a beautiful woman, and I married her. And I'm glad that it was a not too long engagement, right? It's tough. Being a follower of Jesus, choosing the sexual pathway that God gives us, and super loving your hot fiance, which is me and which is her. Right, really tough. But if you think carefully about this, right, it says something about the sickness of our society regarding sex. And it speaks to the sexualisation of our culture, the lack of respect for the power of romantic love, so you don't put any boundaries in, the lack of honour people have for not just their marital boundaries, but actually for each other. And there's probably more things you could say about our current times. And so the easiest pathway for our time is to say to an engaged couple, stay true to marriage, your marriage and marital fidelity, by not awakening love. Don't think these thoughts, don't test these thoughts. Here's the problem I have, is that's not very honest. Is it likely that an engaged couple that are into each other are not going to think these thoughts and test these thoughts? No. It's not likely. So maybe it's better, as this book does, to acknowledge the desire that people have for one another and the power of that, and also have a firm agreement between each other that we will honour each other and we'll honour each other and God by being a wall and a tower. And if all else fails, just get the brothers to come in. My last point is there is this beautiful dance that goes on, this pursuing throughout the song. There's desire, there's seeking, there's finding, there's enjoying. And these lovers, in the process of all that, lift each other up. You especially see it with a woman. When she feels vulnerable, her lover helps her feel secure and more loved and safe. So you see in this book, there's these two people that have a passionate, unreserved, very physical desire for each other, and they chase each other all the time. And I think the science says after 2 years, that kind of love wears off. It's a honeymoon kind of love. What year are you guys into? When we're one? Marriage is what we're counting from. Right, so it's just it wears off. But should it? Should it wear off? We've been married 27 years. Should it wear off after 27 years that I stop pursuing, desiring, seeking, finding, enjoying the woman I'm married to? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that's part of the fallenness of our lives, that people are always looking for novelty. I'm going to speak on behalf of us both. I have found that the length of our trusting relationship over time has actually enriched and improved the quality and desire for one another. That's taken work. It's not always been easy. but we keep pursuing each other. And I think that's just a beautiful way to finish if you're married. Got a little workshop question for you, and then we'll take a break. Turn to people on your table, and here's the question. What do you think is the value of the Song of Songs being in the Bible? Enjoy the conversation. We'll take a break in 10 minutes. Is that right? And can return at what time? It's all right. Anne's coming. So we're going to have a break, and then Anne's going to do the second section. So I'll give you 10 minutes on that conversation. Then we'll take a break, and I'll get you back in 15 after that. Go for it. Yeah. For your voice as well. Yeah, it's up back there.
It's really hard to talk across. And can we have the heaters on? It's really cold.
And repeat it.
Okay, so there's the kettle's boiled and we have cake for our final night, so go ahead and get yourself a cuppa and then head on back in. And Chris has something for us?
I have a final challenge for everyone that does not include celebrity heads. You'll be happy to hear. I thought for our last challenge, maybe to bookend our first challenge, if we could find someone that we've met over the course of the last 6 to 8 weeks and maybe let them know something that you've enjoyed learning about them, or just something you've enjoyed about meeting them over the last couple of weeks. So find someone and just let them know how awesome they are. Cool, cheers.
3 steps without everything. Step
Guys, hello.
I'm enjoying it while it lasts. I'll wait for mine to fall off.
Who do you leave in charge when you go out in the evening?
Well, I guess some families here in Nathan. So, yeah, it's 20, back to 18. Even, like, Ash is 15, so we can, even if it's just Ash. Yeah. I feel like I have to see it. I've got to say that's my encourage. Just go out and have to worry about it.
No, we've got the babysitter and the big ugly. Yeah.
Supervisor.
Babysitter.
Yeah.
But they're actually, see, I know
Everyone's a phone call away these days. Too.
yeah, exactly.
Makes it easy.
That's right. But, no, I do, that's one of the advantages. Like that.
Still, that was the thing, wasn't it? Babysitting. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think anything does. And anything at all makes me solve the problem of it's funny with I know. That's the thing, the job replacement is find someone that fits.
By the way, which stool am I sitting on?
No, either one. Whoever you like. But yeah, use that mic there. Okay, so we will have a Q&A at the end of all this. Now, there are lots of different implications you could explore from the Song of Songs. But because we've got Anne here, we're going to go in the direction that Anne's expertise takes us, all right? And some of you have looked ahead and seen the pictures, so you've got some idea of where that might go. The audience we recognise is quite diverse. So the numbers of married people here are far less than the numbers of people who are not married. So if I'm going to say this, there's not many married people in the room. There might be a few more online, I'm not sure. It's an awkward conversation, what Anne's going to do, and it's awkward for Christians. It's actually awkward for everybody, so it's one thing that Anne's noted. And the topic is personal. So if that's all too much, it's okay to leave with no embarrassment at all. But we are looking at the Song of Songs, so it does seem appropriate that Anne was going to speak about sex, and because that is there is definitely a strong theme in the Song of Songs. So if you're married, you can apply at will whenever you get time. If you are not married, you can have homework. If you're not married, you may be one day, so you might want to pay attention. If you are not married or no longer married and never want to be married again, I hear an amen, right? So we were just talking about this, Swanee and myself. These kinds of conversations are often not encouraged in church, and often people don't know where to go. So in church, you kind of got uncles and aunties and older people, and you never know how what you know might be of help to other people. So if you are a person who's, I don't want to be married, and this is all kind of history, well, just remember, you could be just the right person for somebody to talk to one day. So there are all these disclaimers I've made, but given those disclaimers, let's welcome Anne as she shares with us.
Okay, good evening, everybody. So the first thing I want to say is this talk is going to be very different from what you've had over the last few weeks. So please don't compare it to anything else. It will be different. And as Jason has said, some of what I may say may be a bit confronting or make people feel uncomfortable. I'm not going to be offended if you need to leave. That's fine. I'm not taking anything personally. Now, I was just talking to Miranda before. The first I heard that I was doing this talk was through Miranda, when she said, "Oh yeah, Jason's volunteered for you to do this." I went, "Really? Better have a conversation with my husband about that." And when I did find out that I was going to be presenting, I struggled a little bit to figure out how I was going to approach this topic. And I ended up deciding that it would be best for me to put my professional hat on and tackle it from a health professional perspective. So it's important for you to understand I'm not a theologian, I'm not a counsellor, I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not a sex therapist, okay? So I'm just stating that fact right now. What I am is a pelvic health physiotherapist. And what that means is that in my professional life, I see mostly women with some men, and I see patients who have issues with bladder problems, bowel problems, prolapse issues, sexual dysfunction, pelvic pain, and I see women of all ages from quite young all the way up to quite elderly, which includes young women, pregnant women, postnatal women, which means after you've had a baby, postmenopausal women, so there's a bit of a mix. And in my initial assessment, I ask a lot of questions, and a lot of those questions are pretty personal, including questions about sexual function. And sadly, sometimes I'm the first person that my patients have even mentioned this to. And they haven't even mentioned it to their partner or their GP. In my role, I generally address more of the physical components. For instance, pelvic floor problems. I'm going to talk about pelvic floor in a moment, so don't stress if you think, what's the pelvic floor? But sexual dysfunction is usually more complex than just the physical components. So when assessing a patient, we use what we call a biopsychosocial framework. And what that means is we look at 3 components. The bio means what's happening with the body or issues in the tissues. So for instance, what's going on with the pelvic floor muscles. We look at the psychological component, the brain and the nerves, so people's beliefs, expectations, emotions, behaviours and perceptions. And then the social is the world that patient lives in. So what's their family life like? What are their stress levels like? Those kind of things. Now, I don't profess to be an expert on sex. However, it is something that I discuss with my patients a lot of the time. And my experience has been that I think a lot of my patients don't necessarily have a good understanding of their own anatomy or the physiology of sex. Now, it's important to understand that all of us come from different backgrounds and experiences that shape how we view sex. Now, you may have grown up in a family where intimacy was pretty normal and sex was openly discussed. Or you may actually just ask Emily that question about our conversations around the dinner table. Or you may have grown up in a family where sex was never talked about. And if it was in quite a negative way. For some people, school sex ed and porn is their only education about sex. And sadly, there are others who have experienced sexual abuse. All of these experiences shape us as people and how we respond sexually. So I thought I'd start by giving you an idea of some of the concerns that my patients have, because I don't think they're unique to just my patients. I'm going to talk a little bit about the female and male anatomy. And then I'm going to talk about 2 different models that describe sexual response and some of the differences in sexual function between individuals and some of the complexities involved. Mr. Slide Man, can I have the first slide? So there's 2 books that I've used while preparing for this talk. One's called The Best Sex for Life by Dr. Patricia Wirikoon. I don't know if some of you may have heard of her. She's actually a Christian sexologist. The other book, it's not a Christian book, but it was recommended reading by a sexual health physician at one of my professional conferences, and it's called Come As You Are by Emmeline Nagoski, and she's also a sexologist. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about some of the concerns that some of my patients have, and like I said, I don't think these are necessarily unique to just the patients that I see. So my first group is postnatal women. So these are women who've had a baby recently. I tend to be seeing them because they may have had some significant perineal tear as a result of the birth. And some of the... So I generally see them about 7 to 8 weeks after they've had a baby. And in my initial assessment, I tend to ask them, have you resumed sex yet? If I had $1 for every woman who said, are you kidding me? At that point, I would be quite rich by now. And often it's because they have a fear of this is going to hurt. I'm worried that I'm going to re-tear. So there's a lot of fear associated with it. Also, when women are breastfeeding, there's a lack of the hormone estrogen, and the vaginal tissues actually like estrogen, and so the tissues can be drier, which can result in discomfort with sex. They're exhausted. When you're tired, sometimes you just want to sleep. And the other thing that I notice is after women have children, their body may have changed. There are some women who have quite a traumatic birth, and it can impact them psychologically, emotionally, and just the way they feel about their body. My second group is the women who are going through or that perimenopausal stage or postmenopause, so going through or they've passed menopause. A condition called vaginal atrophy, which is again when those tissues in the vaginal tissues become thinner and drier, and there can be a lot of discomfort with sex. And by the way, there is actually a solution for that for women. There's mood changes, and again, going through those changes, how women perceive their bodies. Sometimes they feel uncomfortable about the changes that are occurring with their body. I'm often seeing these women because they've got either a bladder problem, a bowel problem, or a prolapse issue, and that can seriously impact how they feel about themselves as well. Or their partner's got erectile dysfunction. So there's a whole bunch of issues there as well. And then my third group is my patients who have pelvic pain. Now, these could be patients who just have chronic pelvic pain, so they have pain a lot of the time. And that can be for a variety of reasons. Or women who, they don't have pain any other time, but they only have pain if they're having sex, or if they're having a pelvic exam, or maybe if they're trying to insert a tampon. So the pain may be as a result of increased pelvic floor muscle tone, which we'll talk about in a moment. It can be at the opening of the vagina, it can be deep inside. Sometimes there's a history of sexual abuse, but not always. And it's important to understand that pain during sex is not normal and it should be investigated. I think sometimes women just put up with a lot when, you know, it's embarrassing to talk about these things. They don't necessarily want to talk about it with their GP. And then there's my male patients who I'm usually seeing after prostate surgery because they've got leakage issues, and one of the results of prostate surgery can be erectile dysfunction as well. Okay, so that's some of my patients. I mean, even not last Thursday, the Thursday before. So in my list of patients, I had 3 women that I was seeing, all who had pain with sex. So one was quite a young woman with a history of domestic violence. Another one was a postnatal woman who had a history of painful sex. And another one was a postmenopausal woman, so she was in her 50s, long history of painful sex, and had just stopped having sex because didn't want to go there, it was too painful. So that's just in one day. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the anatomy. So you might have some pictures. I'm sorry if my pictures are a bit confronting as well. So first one. Okay. Our sexual organs include the genitals and the brain. Important to not forget about the brain. So in this first slide, I'm not sure if you will all be able to see that because I might be in the way, but I think in sex ed, you know, people learn about the vagina and the uterus and the ovaries and the fallopian tubes, but sometimes the vulva kind of gets left out a little bit. So that's the outer part of the female genitals, and so you can see on this the picture on the right, and that includes the mons pubis, which is that soft tissue covering the pubic bone, the labia majora, or the outer lips, the labia minora, the inner lips, and the clitoris. There's also glands called Bartholin's glands that secrete a thin watery fluid to keep the vulva moist. Now, really important to know, vulvas are all different. If I lined everyone up in this room, I'm not going to talk about your vulva, if I lined everyone up in this room and compared your faces, they're all different, aren't they? You wouldn't expect you all to have the same face. So why is it that we expect everyone to have the same vulva? It really saddens me when I have patients who think they're not normal because maybe their labia looks different to what they think it should. I remember having a patient, and for years she had this little voice in her head from when she'd had her baby where a male midwife had told her that, oh, it's okay, surgery will fix that. I was horrified. Sometimes I point my patients in the direction of a really interesting website. It's called the Labia Library, and it shows women that there is a huge variation of what's classified as normal. And I think, for me, it's reassuring women that there is a lot of variation and that's all normal. You don't have to look, a certain way. It's about, does it work? Is it functional? So, next slide. All right, this is an interesting picture, this one. So the clitoris is the female equivalent to the male penis and can vary in size between women. So if we look at this slide, so the pink bit there is the erectile tissue. So on the right-hand side, obviously, is the penis with the pink erectile tissue. And on the left is the female equivalent. And you can see how they kind of look similar. Obviously, there's differences. The male erectile tissue is just a lot more obvious, okay? So what you see or feel is only the tip of the organ. We're talking about the clitoris here. And it consists of erectile tissue that extends deep within the tissue of the vulva. And during arousal, the tissue swells and increases in size, just like the penis does. And just like the glands of the penis, the glands of the clitoris is very sensitive, and most women are sexually aroused when it is touched gently, at least to begin with. Now, really important to understand this. Less than a third of women will reliably orgasm with vaginal penetration alone, and there's not something wrong with them if they don't. I think sometimes women think, is there something wrong with me if I don't have an orgasm just with vaginal penetration? It's kind of like expecting a man to orgasm with perineal stimulation alone, and that's the area behind the scrotum that goes to the anus or the back passage. Now they might, but we're not going to say they're broken or they're not normal if they don't. Emily Nagoski says in her book, intercourse is not a very effective way to stimulate the clitoris, and clitoral stimulation is the most common way to make an orgasm happen. Okay, let's move on to the pelvic floor muscles. So next slide. Can I just have a show of hands? Who's heard about the pelvic floor muscles? Yay! Okay, that's really reassuring for me. Okay, this is what I talk about all the time. I get quite passionate about pelvic floors. So first of all, if we think about the anatomy, males have a pelvic floor as well. It's just that females, I think because we have babies, are a bit more familiar with their pelvic floors. Actually, usually only when they get pregnant. Most women don't tend to have a really good understanding of their pelvic floor before then. So normally with my patients, now you don't have to do this, but with my patients I often get them to put their hand on their pubic bone at the front and one hand on their coccyx at the back, and they notice how far apart those 2 points are. And the pelvic floor muscles run from front to back between those 2 points. And then I get them to sit on their hands and rock from side to side. And you could do this later if you want. You can feel 2 bony bits, okay? So that's part of your pelvis. And your pelvic floor also runs from side to side between those 2 bony points. So if you look at the picture Let's see. So if we look at the picture on the left, you've got a male pelvic floor and a female, and that's actually, they're more of the superficial or the outer layer of muscles. So if you're looking if somebody's standing with their legs apart and you're looking up, that's kind of the direction we're looking at, and you've removed all the skin, obviously. The picture on the right is, if you're looking down into the pelvis from above, if somebody's standing. Obviously, we've only got a female pelvis here, and you can see it kind of looks a little bit like a trampoline. So the way I describe it is it's like a trampoline with a little hole, and through the little hole pass a few openings. So in the male, there's 2 openings, and in the female, there's 3 openings. The urethra, where your wee comes out, vagina in the middle, and then your back passage at the back. And those muscles have got a few jobs to do. They control your bladder so that you stay dry when you cough and sneeze and you can get to the toilet okay. They control your bowels and allow you to hold on to wind when you want to. And they hold all your pelvic organs up, so that's kind of important. Now, sometimes these muscles can be a bit overactive, which means they're not very good at relaxing. And in women who have pain with sex, sometimes these muscles just are not very good at relaxing. So what I want you to do is think about your muscles up here in your neck, okay? In fact, just feel your muscles in your neck, okay? Now, what I want you to do is bring your shoulders up near your ears and just make them go a bit tight and feel the muscles. And now relax and let them come back down. Can you feel a difference in those muscles? Some people have a lot of tension in those muscles. I'm one of those people, actually. And if you walked around with your shoulders up near your ears all day, do you think you might get a bit sore in those muscles? Has anyone experienced pain in those muscles? Yeah. So when you're constantly in a contracted state, that can give you pain. So do you think maybe if your pelvic floor muscles are in a contracted state, they might give you pain as well? And that's what can happen. The other thing to know is the brain is really good at learning. So for some women, they may have a bad experience, and this is sadly where women who have a history of sexual abuse, it can be a problem later on for them. Even if their brain is saying, I actually want to have sex at this moment in time, their pelvic floor responds almost automatically to contract and to protect them, and that can be really painful. And the brain gets really good at just learning, when the muscles get good at learning this response, that if anything comes towards the vagina, the muscles will automatically tense and contract. So it's important, and I've said this before, it's important to understand that pain during sex is not normal and it should be investigated. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So this is the male anatomy. And the external genitals include the penis, the scrotum, and the testes. The penis contains erectile tissue just like the clitoris, as we've talked about. And just like vulvas, penises are all different and all normal. Did you hear that? All normal? Okay. So, moving on. I'm going to talk about 2 different models of sexual response. Now, the first model, and if we can have the next slide, is the sexual response cycle, which describes different phases. And it's a model that's more commonly quoted, and you may be familiar with this, having different phases. So we've got desire, arousal, orgasm, and resolution. So desire meaning having an interest in engaging in sexual activity. Arousal it describes how excited or turned on you get when you anticipate or engage in sex, and it includes both subjective and physical arousal. Okay, so there's two aspects there. So physical or genital arousal refers to the physiological changes, so what's happening with the body, as in increased heart rate, blood flow, vaginal engorgement or erection. And then the subjective arousal has more to do with what you are feeling or not feeling about what your body is actually doing. So it's important to understand there's those two components. Orgasm is a release of sexual tension, and resolution is when the body returns to its normal level of functioning. Now, there are differences, however, between males and females in the way that sexual desire, arousal and orgasm are perceived and even sequenced in this sexual response. So in other words, sexual desire does not always come first, particularly in women. There's also individual variations in desire, arousal and orgasm, all within the normal range. Now, Patricia Weirakoon, she talks about the male microwave oven response versus the female slow cooker response. Now, again, that's generalising between the sexes because it's not quite as simple as that, but if, generally speaking, there is differences between men and women. So let's talk about the order of these phases. So typically, again, not always, but typically, for men the order begins with desire. In women it tends to be a little bit more complex, but not always. And context is important. So what is happening at that particular moment in time? So Emily Nagoski in her book states context, which is external circumstances and internal brain state, is fundamental to most women's sexual well-being. And we're going to talk a little bit about context in a while. So for women, arousal often occurs before desire. And desire can actually be thought of as either spontaneous or responsive, and both are normal. So, spontaneous desire. I guess as the word spontaneous means, it's initiating sex or wanting sex out of the blue. And it works like this for about 75% of men and 15% of women. Responsive desire, on the other hand, which means wanting sex when something erotic is already happening, that's about 5% of men and 30% of women. And all the rest, it's usually a combination of those and it's context dependent, which we're going to talk about. So, in a relationship, one partner might feel like they are the ones who always initiate sex and think, why is it always me that initiates sex? So it could just be because one person has a spontaneous desire style and the other a responsive desire style. One is not better than the other. It's just different. Now, at this point, it's important to talk about a concept called non-concordance, and that sounds like a really long word, but the idea that genital response doesn't always match mental experience. So, what's going on up here in the brain does not always match what's going on in the genitals. So, it is the relationship between the peripheral system, which is the genitals, and the central system, which is the brain and the nervous system. And the relationship between these systems is different for men and women. So men have, on average, a 50% overlap between their genital response and their subjective arousal, or what they are feeling, in their head, in their brain. But it's a lot less in women. So the genitals tell you that's sexually relevant. The person or the brain tells you that turns me on or I am enjoying this. So that's why it's important to pay attention to your partner's words more than what's going on with their genitals. So for example, for men, they might wake up with an erection. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're feeling sexually turned on. Or on the other hand, they might be feeling sexually turned on, but they're just not getting an erection. So there's not always, sometimes there's a mismatch between what's going on. And which is why when I'm talking to my patients, particularly my postnatal and postmenopausal women, use lube. Lube is your friend. Use lots of it. Because one thing that is going to make it really uncomfortable for women is if they're not well lubricated. So there is nothing wrong with using lube. And I tell my patients to use it all the time. Now, the second model, if we go to the next slide, is called the dual control model, or model of brakes and accelerator. So this model proposes a sexual accelerator and sexual brakes. And this is a newer theoretical model of sexual response and was developed in the late 1990s. It describes not just what happens during arousal, as in what the body's doing, say erection, lubrication, etc., but also the central mechanism that governs sexual arousal, which controls how and when you respond to sexually relevant sights, sounds, sensations, and ideas. So as the name implies, there's two parts. And if you think about it, in the rest of the body, there's often an excitation system and an inhibition system in controlling different functions within the body. For instance, micturition, which is doing a wee, simplistically. It's this balance of excitation and inhibition with what's going on with the neural control. So, as the name implies, there's two parts. The sexual excitation system, or the accelerator of your sexual response. So it receives information about sexually relevant stimuli in the environment, things you see, hear, smell, touch, taste or imagine, and sends signals from the brain to the genitals to tell them, turn on. And then there's the sexual inhibition system, and this is your sexual brake. In fact, there's two different types of brakes. So imagine a foot brake and a hand brake. So one notices all the potential threats in the environment. For instance, you've got two young children and you think, I really don't want to get pregnant now. That's something that's going to be in your mind. Or my baby is going to start crying in the middle of this. And send signals saying, turn off. Think of that like a foot brake. And the other one is a bit more like a hand brake, a chronic, no-level, no thank you signal. So the foot brake is associated with fear of performance consequences, so what's going to happen as a result of this. And the hand brake is associated with fear of performance failure, like, am I going to be able to have an orgasm or not? So sexual function is about the balance between the accelerator and the brakes, and sexual arousal is about activating the accelerator and deactivating the brakes. Okay, so on average, and again I'm saying on average, men often have more sensitive accelerators and women more sensitive brakes. However, there's a lot of variation within the groups, not just between the groups. So for most people, both these systems are medium, so they're neither overly sensitive nor problematically insensitive. But some people, they might have a very strong brake, for instance. Now, mood and your environment have an impact on these systems, and this is what we talk about context. So just a few examples of maybe some brakes. So not feeling good about your body, like I talked about before, some of my postnatal women who they've experienced changes to their body, they're not feeling particularly excited about those changes. Then there's, another brake could be that fear of getting pregnant. Like I said, maybe the exhausted mother who's got two young children who really doesn't want to get pregnant just yet again. Relationship issues and a lack of trust in the relationship. I really believe that great sex relies on good trust. Tiredness is another break. Stress, huge break. And the environment, what's going on in the environment around you, as in, is there a crying baby in the background? So it makes sense that couples understand their individual sensitivities to these two systems and what might cause the brakes to be activated. So let's talk a little bit more about context. So what activates your accelerator or hits your brakes is context dependent. And women's sexuality is even more context sensitive than men's, that developmental, cultural and life history factors all profoundly shape how and when our bodies respond. And context is made up of two things. So, circumstances of the present moment, for example, what's going on in your environment at that moment in time, and what's the brain state in the present moment. Are you relaxed? Are you stressed? Are you trusting of your partner or not? Loving or not? So I want you to think about tickling as an example. So maybe go back to your childhood with a sibling. You're mucking around, you're having fun, you're tickling each other. So your sibling's tickling you, you're laughing hysterically, and it's all fun and games. Now think about another context. Your sibling is really annoying you, has done something to really annoy you, and to annoy you even more, they decide to tickle you. Now, do you think you're going to feel the same way in both of those situations? No, you're not, are you? So it's the same sensation, but because the context is different, your perception of that sensation is different. And this also is true for sex. So what a woman wants and likes changes based on her external circumstances and her internal brain state. And that is a really useful thing for men to understand, I think. So context, really important. So what are some things that you might take away from tonight? I think the first one is understand that there is a lot of variation between individuals and it's all normal. If you are a married couple, remember your partner can't read your mind. Talk with each other. Try to understand your differences, your likes and dislikes, what activates your accelerator and your brakes. Number 3, pain with sex is not normal, and seek help if you are experiencing pain. And I will say this actually is not just for women. There are some, I haven't actually personally treated men with this, but certainly pelvic health physios do treat men with pelvic pain, and some men can have pain with sex as well. And you may want to do a little bit more reading. I know this is kind of a topic that is a topic where, generally speaking, a lot of people don't like to talk about it, or particularly if they've got issues. If you do want to do a little bit more reading and you want a Christian perspective, I'd say the one by Dr. Patricia Raccoon is probably a good place to start, The Best Sex for Life. That might be helpful for you to have a read of. So we got through. Yay. So, that's pretty much what I have to say. So I will pass it back over to Jason.
Thanks, Anne. Any questions? She's interesting, isn't she? When we go to parties, people find out what I do, and that's the end of the conversation. They find out what she does, and there's a lot of interesting conversations had from there.
Or it's the end of the conversation.
Yeah, or the end of the conversation. So, yeah, any questions as we finish up?
I don't have a question. I was just going to use the mic.
I was going to say, I'm not going to be offended if you don't want to ask any questions either.
I guess I was sort of wondering how you find your faith interacting with your practice, like in terms of like, you know, advising non-married couples on their sexual health and that sort of thing, and like how do you kind of balance that with like your faith and that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I guess my goal is to provide my patients with information and to be the best health professional that I can be. I don't think it's my place to... I mean, obviously... I'm not great at thinking off the top of my head, Taz. I know that it is a tough one. I don't think it's my role to say to people, this is what I think you should be doing. In my workplace, I have to actually be careful as well what I say. I want women to have the best relationships or the best pelvic health. So I don't know if I have a really good answer for you. I'll have to think about that a bit more.
I think our role is always to help people make the best of their lives, for whatever choices that they, from their moral systems, make. I personally am so proud of Anne in her role and what she does. So she mentioned how many women feel ashamed about their bodies and really struggle living in their bodies. And I think Anne has an amazing role, and the other professionals, in giving people dignity, being able to live better. So I'm very proud of her. It's interesting for me. Anne sees this as a vocation from God, as in this is what she believes God wants her to do. And I've often said to her, not many people see their day jobs like that. Pastors probably should, but not many other people do. And I just think Anne's a real gift in that area. So very proud of her, and I'm glad she helps women in particular, but men as well. So you imagine men who are trying to live with, often after prostate surgery, just a sense of failure and, again, loss of dignity, and Anne really helps people live much better. So that's great.
How do people get to see a pelvic physiotherapist? Do they Google? Do they go to their GP? Do they just knock on the door and say, can I have an appointment?
That's a very good question too. So I have 3 jobs. I work in the public system, and in the public system you need a referral from your GP at least, or you come through the Women's Health Clinic. I work at Ashford Hospital, but that's on the postnatal ward. And then I work at a private practice. And in private practice, you don't actually need a referral from your GP. So I have a lot of patients who just Google and they find a pelvic health physio. The Australian Physiotherapy Association has a website, and you can look on there. There's a little thing called Find a Physio, and you can put in specific search options like a pelvic health physio, and it'll give you options of physios that are, within a 5K or 10K or whatever radius. In private practice, you don't actually even need a referral.
What's the cost for a private
Okay, so that again is going to depend on the practice. So it's really, I mean, the thing about a pelvic health physio, it does tend to be more expensive because it's more of a specialised area and you do extra training. There will be some variation in cost. If people have got private health insurance, obviously they can claim some of that cost back. The other option is...
How much?
Well, I can only give you the cost of the practice that I work at. For an hour, I think it's $176. For 1 hour, for half an hour, normally the first appointment is usually an hour, and the subsequent appointments are 30 minutes, and I think it's just over $100. Yeah. You can also, through a GP, you can also get what's called a care plan for chronic conditions, and often some of these conditions are classified as chronic because people have had them for an extended period of time, and you get 5 visits per calendar year, and Medicare will pay $56. So obviously there's still a gap, but that's another option for people if they don't have private health insurance. And through the public system, it's free, but there is a very long waiting list. That's the problem.
Helen, do you have a question? No, I can ask her any question anytime, can't I?
I think I appreciate your talk, and thank you for being as frank and as calm and expansive as you have been, because I think we need to discuss things like this more than we do. And just a comment that in the last 2 weeks there's been several articles about the problems that happen in a normal childbirth can result in damage that often doesn't show up until much later in life. And I think the discussion needs to happen more than it has in the past. So thank you.
Yeah, in fact, there was last week, Thursday last week, I think there was an article on ABC, what's the website? ABC News or whatever? Yeah, there was an article. So I'm thinking it might, at least the one I saw was probably the one that you read as well. Yeah. I mean, sadly, it's, the stats are that 1 in 3 women who've had a baby will wet themselves at some point. That's pretty high. And the good news is that we've got evidence to show that pelvic floor muscle training can be really, really effective in managing incontinence issues and prolapse issues as well. So, that's the exciting thing for me, is we can actually do something about it. And I think that is why I love this job so much, is because if I could make a difference in somebody's life, because this is all stuff that people don't want to talk about. It's embarrassing. I remember one lady saw me, this was at the private practice, and she had fecal incontinence. And you can imagine that's even worse because it's very debilitating and people just not go out. And she did really well, and she called me her angel. So that was lovely. But, I think if you can for me, if I can make a difference to somebody's quality of life, that's the best feeling ever.
What do you wish people knew or were doing proactively? Like, obviously you see a lot of people who already have issues or need specialised support. What do you wish people were kind of already doing to sort of at least circumvent some of those issues?
I think having a good understanding how your body works is a good place to start. I think, as I say, so one of the classes that I run at work, when I'm talking about pelvic floor to my pregnant women, I tend to say, for most women, they don't actually think about their pelvic floor until they get pregnant. And that tends to be when maybe women first notice that they might have an issue. So, it's not uncommon for women when they're pregnant to experience stress incontinence for the first time ever in their life, and it's quite, confronting, as in, oh my goodness, what just happened to me? And we know that pregnancy weakens pelvic floor muscles, so I think that's a really good time to introduce women to their pelvic floors. I think we also need to be a little bit careful because muscles do two things. So they contract, but they also need to be able to relax as well. And sometimes people can go a bit too gung-ho and go, right, I'm just going to contract and do all these pelvic floor exercises because I think this is really good. And then their muscle is so tight, it can't relax. And then you can have problems like I've just talked about. So there are issues with a muscle that can't relax, just as there are issues with a pelvic floor that is weak and not working when it needs to work.
You grew up in a pretty conservative family, Presbyterian Reformed, if you don't know how conservative they are. Yet you've spoken pretty freely and openly about sex and the body, and just talk to us about what was that journey like, coming from a fairly Puritan background and then speaking as you did tonight.
Okay. I think I've got my profession to thank for that, mostly. Because I do remember my dad talking really awkwardly about sex. It wasn't a pleasant experience from what I remember. So I don't really feel like I got a good education at home. So I think just probably over the years in my professional life, and I mean, to start with, when you study physio, you have to kind of get over your, what's the word? Your
Inhibitions.
Yeah, that's it. Because, in first year, you basically have to strip off because you've got to assess each other's shoulders and hips and all sorts. And then when you do pelvic health, it's another level again. I won't tell you the pracs we've done on each other. But you can imagine. So I think it's probably just been the years of doing professional development, learning as I've gone with my patients, and you learn from experience. I had a patient just the other week. This was a young woman who had pain with sex, and I'd done an initial assessment, and I was doing an objective assessment, which means I was doing a vaginal examination to assess her pelvic floor muscles, and she was fine to start with, and then suddenly she got this excruciating pain. It was like that. And I was not doing, like my finger was just resting really gently on the muscles. And like I said, the body can respond in a certain way without you wanting it to, it can just happen. And had that happened to me 10 years ago, I think I would have probably freaked out a little bit. But just with experience, you learn, okay, this woman's pain is going to escalate even more if I do not remain calm, and we need to work on some strategies to get this pain under control. So we did some different things, and her pain reduced. And so she learnt that, there's some things that I can actually do myself to bring this level of pain down. And so that was actually a really good learning experience for her. But that's just from years of experience and learning as you go. So I think it's just experience, really.
Yeah, so there's a sadness in me about that, because we've just read a book which has, in holiness, celebrated the physicality, the sensual desire of a man and a woman. We've just read that book in the Bible. And the church hasn't found a way of speaking with the same level of holiness and liberty and helpfulness for either of us, really, and probably most of us in the room. May not have been the conversation you thought you were coming for tonight as we were doing the Song of Songs. I hope you found it helpful. I certainly think it sounds to me that you found Anne quite helpful. And we are very thankful that you were able to contribute. I am certainly, but I pretty much speak for us all. We're all thankful. So we're going to wrap up. Is there anything you want to say as we finish?
No, not at all, except to thank everybody for coming along. This has probably been our best attended 6-week seminary we've had. I will be sending you out a survey in a couple of weeks' time just to get your feedback on how it's been for you, and to kind of fine-tune what we do in the future. So thanks once again. It's been really enjoyable, and I hope that you've got much out of it. And Lois has something to say.
I just want to thank you guys. You've put a lot of work into it. Monday is your day off, but for our sakes, you've set this up and you've spent a lot of time organising it, all of you, our pastors. So thank you very much. I've learned a lot. I love to study the Bible deeply, and I've just loved it. It's been fantastic. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, and I guess I should also say, if there's any part of this whole sessions that you would like to revisit, you do have a link, so you can go and watch the recordings that have been made. If you've lost that link, you need it again, let me know and I can send it to you.
Thanks, Anne.